on with this. I just drew some lines, and then we'll just put less aggressive than I normally am to go on that blue block. And I'm using the 3/8 now, so there's more resistance to the with this. I've always been into trouble by insulting my fingers. Many years ago, right, move that rig. Back in the 80s, I think it was, when Dale Nish was travelling a lot and doing workshops around the US, and he used to go down to Arrowhead quite often. And when he was there, he used to stay over the weekend before he flew out, and he'd find local tree surgeons or sawmills and buy a log from them. And while he was there, he'd rough out balls of woods that he couldn't get up in Utah. So he roughed these things out, hollowed them out and so forth, and then put them in boxes and so forth and shipped them up to Utah in Provo. And one year I went down into his basement, I was staying there, and looked at this, and there was box after box full of these bowl blocks roughed out. And I said to him, you know what you need, Dale? And he says, what's that? He says, a woodturner to finish some of those pieces. He sort of looks at me a bit over his glasses, which says he's annoyed. And he says, you better take some of them with you on your travels, because I was doing stuff like I am now. So I picked up these pieces, half a dozen, that's all I took. And it was one of the early components in Philadelphia. It's in that centre there, because it's solid. And here I was demonstrating away, and I got this piece that was one of his roughed out bolts, so to speak. And I put it up on the lathe and I said, you can see this piece has been roughed out, so to speak. I says, I've got this guy over here in America that roughs things out for me. I said, some of you might have heard of him. His name's Dale Nish, you see. And it was when he was known everywhere with his books and all the rest of it. And there's uproar in this room, you see. Everybody's laughing and hurraying and so forth. And Dale was demonstrating in the other room. And after we'd finished, he came and he said, what the heck was going on in your room? I said, I was just telling him a story about somebody, you see. And he says, who was that? I said, you. Anyway, next time I'm up there demonstrating, he's not on. And I saw him appear at the doorway. I tell the same story with him in the room, see, and everybody turns around and laughs at him. As I'm getting towards the end of that bowl, he appears at my shoulder here. And as I take the piece off, he grabs it and goes, he says, that's mine, it's gone. And I've had fun of it. And I always said, if you want to be in this game, you've got to have a sense of humour. You certainly need one if you're around me. You could get hurt. Anyway, whatever. This is much harder than I expected. This wood was wet, I'd have had 3 bowls out of it by now that have been gone, and the next one in, and this. The resistance from this dry wood is considerable, and it's more resistant than I anticipated now. To be perfectly honest, I thought this would turn a lot easier than it does. So there we are. Now, some of you will know a very experienced turner. How many have been turning less than a couple of years within the room here? Not many. Not many. Okay. All I'd say to you is, you know, there's a lot of elementary work you have to put in before you come reasonably confident and stuff. Competent, I should say. When you make this entry cut, and I'm just making this point, is if I go in there with the flute of the bevel 45 degrees out to the vertical, there's a good chance it will skid across the surface. But if you bring the gouge and rotate it so the flute is vertical here, and pushing towards that headstock with the angle of the bevel. And it's only the first quarter of an inch you do that, and that will stop it running on you. You just push that, bring that tool vertical here, just go into there like that. So, and once you've got that, then you can rotate the garage round. It's just one way of stopping it running, basically. That's all. A bit of vibration there. Okay. Now this, I'm now going to stop making that wall thinner, and now I'm going to take more of the meat out. Now I'm down beyond the top. I'll pick up my half-inch garage, which is more aggressive. That is hard. Okay. Alan set me up, I think.
Yeah, well, of course.
I'll tell you a story. I was in New Zealand once, and they gave us woods that they thought we wouldn't be able to turn. They were like woolly monkeys, but we coped with it. But they thought we wouldn't do it. But with the oil and wax treatment, it softened the fibres. They could cut that camel skin, camel coating that it had. All right. Get rid of this out. Okay, this will be quite attractive by the look of it, that figure through there. We'll now just go through. I'm just removing mass at this point in time. I'll go through explanations in a moment when I'm refining this out. That was my good glasses on for. Better put those up there. Can't see without those. Okay. Now I'm just going to check what wall thickness I've got because I want it reasonably consistent through here. Let's just do that, see where we are. We're pretty good. It's thicker, it's a bit thicker through here, so we'll take a bit more out. It doesn't matter at this stage. But when I'm roughing out I try and keep the so the distortion and the drying is more equal. It's better to have them consistent with water. Okay. Now if I was making this as a rough out bowl, this would come off the chuck now and be set aside. I'd put it on the scales, weigh it, date it and so forth, and then check weigh it every so often. And then I'd pick it up and it would have gone somewhat elliptical. Now what I'm going to do now is to now true up the outside. This piece would have gone back on the lathe in an elliptical form. It would have shrunk across the width but not longitudinally. And Glenn Lucas, one of the guys in Ireland who's an incredibly productive bowl turner out there, or cellar bowls, etc. Glenn has got to the stage that he kiln dries all his own wood, and he's got to the stage now that he makes them usually about 15 by 6, the most common bowl that he makes. And he's got to the stage now that he'll leave on the board, he's come to the conclusion, if he makes that, cuts it 15 1/4, and it's 16 inches across there, it will still finish up a 15-inch bowl. So he gains 3/4 of an inch of wood on each bowl that he cuts across the width across the length of the plank, and he normally finishes up with getting another bowl out of there. That's how he's worked it. So if you look at his bowls that are in the kiln, they've all got flaps on this end and that end, but the distortion that takes place, these edges will creep in, and what that is what it will hold up. It doesn't lose length in the kiln, so to speak. It doesn't shrink longitudinally. it shrinks across the width. So he's thought it out to that degree that he gains another bowl by chopping on that length. It's quite an interesting scenario, but it works, and he proves it makes it work. Okay, now this situation now, we're coming down to do the finishing outside cuts of this piece. This would have distorted in the seasoning, in the drying process, so that would facilitate the need to true this up. There'll be high spots and low spots on here. It hasn't done that because I'm doing it straight all the way through. So into here, I've taken the 3/8 bowl gouge and I'm shearing this through here now, taking that back to the fullness of the curve here. I'm just truing that up, like so, and then I'll come from the bottom. The base of this bowl is still larger than what it's going to finish up eventually, and then I would shear from here. Now I become left-handed ambidextrous, so I'm pulling this round here like so. Okay. Now I'm using the 3/8 bowl gouge with the bevel rubbing here, with the handle down and shearing through it. This isn't the tool that I normally make my finishing final cuts with. This is getting the shape that I wish it to be. And then for the final finishing cuts, I use a spindle gouge, which I shear cut with in a moment, which is what I'll do on here. Now I'm going to stop the lathe here and just take a look and see if this is tearing in any way, this grain. There's still a bit of woolliness there. It's very directly opposed to the axis of the grain. So it's 10 o'clock and 4 o'clock, if you will, on the clock face. It's doing okay. I don't think I'm going to need to resort to oiling. All I'll say to you is, of the guys who've been in the class the last day or so have heard me say this, but if you've got an area where the grain is tearing, where you're shearing it and scraping it, you soften those fibres either with oil or paste wax, whichever, that's dependent on the finish that you're going to put on the piece. If it's going to be Danish oil, shellac-based sanded sealer, wax, or mineral oil, liquid paraffin oil, whatever we call it in Britain, any of those factors, then you would oil this, because the oil will penetrate deeper, and I use mineral oil to do it. And it softens the fibres, and you shear cut it, and you'll get a 90% surface quality improvement if it's tearing on you. If you're going to put lacquer finishes on it, in Britain we call it cellulose lacquer, you just call it lacquer here, it's the same difference. Or polyurethane finishes, then you would apply the wax onto it, because if you put the lacquer or the polyurethane on it, there'll be a chemical reaction to it, and it will go white and blotchy. But with the wax, it doesn't do that. You've removed 95% of it in any case. Any residue of wax that is in those open pores after the sanding doesn't seem to affect any application of lacquer finishes or polyurethane finishes. But if you're going to think of oil finishing, if you use oil, don't think of using those finishes. Okay, so now what I'll do, I'll come in here with my shear cutting spindle gouge. Where's the camera? There's the camera. Have you got a screen?
No.
Oh, I thought you put a screen. Oh, I'm sorry. So this isn't going to help you much. This spindle gouge here, it's got a very obtuse angle. This is more used for end-grain hollowing for vessels and boxes, basically. But what I use on this long side grind here, the guys in the class today have known we've used this for planing cuts on this heel part through here. On the bowls, you use this part, this first ½ inch between my fingers here. And I drop the handle down as a rule and apply it at 45 degrees and let the bevel rub, and that's what the outside of all my bowls are finished with. All of those pieces there will be finished that way. All my solid bowls are finished that way. And I say that I use this on bowls from 3-inch diameter to 23-inch diameter. That's the way I go, and I've done that for over 30